This video contains spoilers for the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and by that we mean spoilers for the remake. So if you've only played the original and think that there is nothing to be spoiled, trust us, there are a lot of things to spoil here. So if you care about that, please beware. In light of the recent remake of Final Fantasy VII, there has been hefty debates and speculation on the value of faithfulness and what truly constitutes the core of a creative work. For example, seeing as this new version of Final Fantasy VII has an entirely different battle mechanic and approach to world navigation, it would be fair to argue that it is no longer Final Fantasy VII the game, as much as it's just a new framework to retell Final Fantasy VII the story. And by golly, isn't that Midgar opening more relevant today than in 1997? Eco-terrorism against corrupt megacorporations with nigh laughably literal representation of class hierarchy. This stuff was on the nose back in the day, and now it's basically the gospel. The powerless sock puppet mayor opposing the capitalist regime is fucking Lenin. Just look at that good boy, comrade! So it was easy to side with both the praise and concern of the product Square Enix had been selling us up until release. On one hand, disappointment over this merely being the first part of something greater. On the other hand, excitement over the story being extended to explore the city of Midgar and its contemporarily relevant issues further than before. Most importantly, while some changes in structural pacing would obviously have to be made, the developers made sure to ease us into an impression of this being a very faithful retelling. Sure, there were premature glimpses of Sephiroth and overt foreshadowing of later plot points, but that kinda went hand in hand with the limited scope of what this segment of the game opted to reveal in the original, which simply wasn't bound to an episodic format. When you get out of Midgar, the game immediately continues. It's not like you have to wait 5 years for the next part. And overall, the game followed suit some 20 odd hours in. It was the classic tale we remembered, just more elaborate. Additions fleshed out the classic characters, rewrote the script into actual human dialogue, offered a better view of surroundings, upped the excitement of set-piece sequences, or provided more foes to beat down with your Buster Sword. Truly, if the Final Fantasy VII Remake had a consistent MO, it was to reinforce that this would be the good old Final Fantasy VII we know and love, to lull us into cementing our own expectations. We know this story, we know the beats, we know what's going to happen, because it draws from related media which we are already intimately familiar with. Of course we do, it's a remake, an updated version of something old. That's just the way remakes are. The very foundation of a remake is to inherit the strict core of something older. And although things will obviously change by the very nature of this being a different product, we are still under the impression that this is intended to stand in for the original work in some way, a new and fancy replacement to serve the same functions. And while we may have blatantly different adaptations of classics, the way these avert expectations will be signaled to the extent where it might even be a valid sales pitch.
It's Sherlock Holmes, but in the future!
In other words, what nature a remake, or an adaptation for that matter, will hold is conventionally pre-established before you even buy the product. Be it how you always knew it, or as never seen before, advertisers and distributors will want to emphasize what relationship this new media will have to the original. So we know beforehand what they polished up, or what cool new bells and whistles they added. It's not always this black or white, but usually it's one or the other. It is with these firm expectations we enter Final Fantasy VII Remake, and are promptly blindsided by the busload of changes it throws at us in the third act. Suddenly, story events, character motivations, fates, and the general narrative structure are more or less completely up in the air. Like a self-aware adversary of the fourth wall, Sephiroth enters the fray at the climax, seemingly with the sole intent of messing around with the story being told. On a dime, this game transformed from a remake into something that arguably transcends even a reimagining. It is a work that betrays the pre-established expectations inherent in its relation to the original. It fundamentally breaks the rules in a supremely spectacular way by taking a remake and leading us on with false impressions of what it would be before changing everything about it. Let us just call this phenomenon a meta subversion. Yeah, we coined it. It's ours now. Throughout the entire game, we get small nods and hints towards where the remake is actually going. Sometimes by way of Aerith leaning against the fourth wall with lines like, "The future isn't set in stone," or this juicy nugget.
Everyone dies eventually.
But it is mostly done by the ghostly entities called Whispers that appear in key scenes, surrounding dying characters and even stopping others from interfering in important moments that shape the story. It is later revealed that they are in fact the embodiment of fate itself, here to keep everything on the right track. In other words, their goal is to make sure that Final Fantasy VII is happening the way it is supposed to. Sort of like a metaphor for the more purist parts of the game's fanbase fighting any change possible. A struggle between the player's expectations of the old and the developers wanting to make something new. The player will most likely have expected that the remake is in fact going into uncharted territory, and it is indeed confirmed to be the case when our heroes are invited by big bad sexy boy Seph-sama to enter the crossroads of fate and destroy destiny itself, breaking the chains that hold them captive to the narrative that was once told so long ago.
What will we find on the other side?
Freedom.
Despite not knowing what will happen, what this might change in the future, Cloud and friends yeet the keepers of the story itself out the window. After the final fight with Sephiroth, the game then concludes with the words, "The unknown journey will continue," implying that whatever comes next could be far from what we had expected the next part would be. Now, of course, we get it. Was this the best way to do it? And was this the right piece of media to do it with? Having the game characters kill the physical manifestation of destiny while surrounded by rabid canonicity ghosts is a bit on the nose. We agree. And while we all love Final Fantasy VII, it really didn't need much more than an external facelift to justify a remake. And maybe a better script. It is clear from Square's perspective that they juggled with the conflict of requests for a remake, while the game was still a beloved classic that people already liked the way it was. It makes perfect sense that they would want to provide something new as a complement to the old in order to surprise even the returning players. Everybody and their grandma knows that Aerith dies by the hand of Sephiroth at this point. It is almost what you could call the archetypical video game spoiler, one that is yet to be surpassed. It was dramatic, bold, and even unprecedented for a video game narrative to shockingly end the life of a main character that players had become emotionally invested in. It affected people on a level very few games had been able to do before, to the extent that it's still talked about to this very day. It was a formative experience for a lot of people, to say the least. The point is that with time, say about 23 years, the surprising death of your favorite character loses that element of surprise. It stops being a spoiler and becomes common knowledge, maybe even the only thing you know about the game. Perhaps the idea of the narrative being up in the air to change in drastic ways will be used to guide us to the obvious conclusion of at last being able to change Arif's tragic fate. And whether this will be a fan service opportunity to finally be able to fulfill decade-old wishes, or a soul-crushing reality smack on some things ultimately being out of our control, it sets up an entirely new expectation of both outcomes being equally plausible. Suddenly, suspense and drama is actually restored in a way unheard of before. We have somehow found ourselves in a situation where nobody even knows for certain if Arif will live or die. That's quite something. Brilliant even. We'll let you decide for yourself if this was the right way to do it, but hear us out on the counter-argument that this sort of thing would only be done as effectively with something as culturally significant as Final Fantasy VII. Like, you think anyone would care if this happened with Final Fantasy V? Get out of here. In earnest, it doesn't really matter that this happened with Final Fantasy VII in particular, or how well it was executed. What's important is that it happened. It has been the common criticism of mainstream media for years that remakes, sequels, prequels, or other derivative installments oversaturate the market. We are both tired of them and likewise so used to them that we know exactly how they play out. This is a ridiculously ripe field for twists and surprises. The tried and true genre subversion is old hat now, so the next logical step would indeed be the meta subversion, the subversion of expectations inherent to knowledge we assume we have of a piece of media based on its relation to an original. It's such an exciting new high-concept idea that it's not only novel, but takes proper guts to pull off. On further examination, the meta subversion wouldn't necessarily have to be tied to only remakes, although that is where it's arguably most effective. The way Metal Gear Solid 2 exploited promotional screenshots and trailers to control player expectations comes to mind, employing the pre-purchase information and the player's relation to the original Metal Gear Solid as the basis for those firm perceptions. Another ripe target is the prequel, a story chronologically set before an earlier work. In this sense, the original would act as a retroactive sequel, providing that firm point B for the point A setup in the beginning of a prequel. We can drag lines between them and assume that we are sure where it is going. Watching the Star Wars prequels, we may initially not know what exactly is going to happen, but we do know that the point B for Anakin Skywalker is Darth Vader, and no matter what treacherous scenario Obi-Wan Kenobi finds himself in, he is destined to one day become local friendly desert man. That expectation is basically the entire premise of those films, that we get to see the events that led up to the classic story we know and love. Yoda isn't just gonna up and die, considering we see him in the original films. We treat it as a fact and don't even question it. Perhaps it even tampers with the tension in that sense. Indeed, by their very nature, prequels are supposedly bound to their parent work in the same way remakes are. It's the same pre-assumed cause and effect point A to B deal. Incidentally, we have a prime example of another work which employs the meta subversion, this time in a prequel context. In the same spirit as Final Fantasy VII, we have the recent Netflix series The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance. Serving as a prequel to the 80s classic Jim Henson film The Dark Crystal, it too establishes a fateful familiarity before pulling the rug from under our feet and subverting the expectations of what we know is going to happen. As things stand by the end of season 1, a character that was supposed to be alive in the time of the original film is now dead, and things look like they might change even more further down the line. Now, it doesn't exactly fit the bill, as things can still happen as the series progress, and this is indeed set in a magical universe where the dead can apparently be brought back. There are blank pages yet to be filled in, with directors affirming that the continued story will fall in line with the preordained order. But it nevertheless sets a nice example of this kind of subversion. We were straight up baffled by some of the twists in Age of Resistance, although only momentarily, as it knowingly toyed with our overconfidently suppositious knowledge of what the big boy YouTube theorist would call canonical lore. That's a powerful fuel that can be exploited in all kinds of new and exciting ways. Fucking with that which the audience believe that they know in this meta way is such a vast new frontier that we are honestly a bit overwhelmed by the possibilities. There is no doubt that there is a real value in preserving a work in a faithful manner when it comes to remakes in particular. But when we look at recent examples, such as Resident Evil 2, 3 and Final Fantasy 7, the sheer amount of changes to presentation and game mechanics makes it a challenge to truly consider these games to be faithful, or an act of preservation for that matter. This will never be this, and vice versa. If we can accept changes as drastic as an original story of about 5 hours being dragged out to 30, then maybe we are ready for these works to also be taken in new directions. Maybe we don't have to be complacent about stories being strictly retold to us over and over again in a hopeless chase for a feeling we felt so long ago. Maybe we are ready to be surprised again.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end. If you like this video, you can support us on Patreon. And if you do, we can make more videos.
A lot of them, actually.
A lot of videos.
All of them.
Some people who did pay us.
We want to thank them.
Yeah.
We want to thank them with a special lovely thank you at the end. And these people are Kay Axwell, Sweet Pink, Mark Elliott, Joel Nilsson, Andrew Jones, Anonymous, Nate Kiernan, Ben Clark, Nishtsvät, Huang Wu, Tommy Håkansson, Afayette, Baba Kenzie, Andreas, Aaron Rain, Magnus, Silly Rookie, Biopanda, Roxy Gill, Trash Baby, Starfighter, Morgan, Casey Explosion, Flame Flamberge, Riley Rose Smith, and Iantu.
If you support us, you can also join our Discord server where we talk about lots of fun things and lots of smart things and lots of stupid things, but also
Mostly stupid things.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Why?